people aren't going to take the time. I mean, we've been chatting for about an hour, okay?
Yeah.
On all kinds of issues, and we haven't solved the great problems of the world. On the other hand, I can, go to the internet and in 20 seconds find out what I'm supposed to think about it. So yes, I mean, this kind of thing can be the equivalent, but how common and how frequent is it?
Do you think people could be convinced in a virtual environment that's more personal, right? This is a one-on-one conversation. You're in Australia, I'm in southern US, and we're communicating, but I'm curious if you think that would be quantifiable for that kind of scenario that you mentioned earlier. You're drinking a glass of wine together kind of thing.
Well, I think absolutely so. But here's why the challenge exists. People aren't going to take the time. I mean, we've been chatting for about an hour, okay?
Yeah.
On all kinds of issues, and we haven't solved the great problems of the world. On the other hand, I can, go to the internet and in 20 seconds find out what I'm supposed to think about it. So yes, I mean, this kind of thing can be the equivalent, but how common and how frequent is it? I mean, you posted a variety of these kinds of videos. What's the highest number of views you've had on any one of them?
A couple thousand, which is not very many in the grand
Not very many, yeah. Now, on the other hand, how many people read the latest Twitter post by Elon Musk?
Yeah.
So what you're trying to do is useful, and the more people who do it, the better. But 2,000 views is not going to counter Elon Musk.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And I was asking less about myself as an individual and more.
I was using you as an example.
Yeah, but I think this dynamic is a little different because we post the videos. And so there's always this thing in the back of my mind where I'm thinking about the final product as well as the conversation. Whereas I think a lot of people could benefit from more authentic connections. But I was kind of asking that in terms of, I noticed that there's a lot of misconceptions about China, for example. And in the modern day, we're able to speak directly to Chinese people, right? To kind of clear up a lot of those misconceptions. And I even got a little bit laughed at by this Chinese trans woman when we were talking about some of the things that I believed, right? And I would say that I believed them because of this propagandized version of China that I learned as an American, for example. So I think I already answered the question of is this a way to get people to connect with people? And you already answered the question of yes, but it's inefficient. I wonder if, I think I got stuck in a circle in my brain and I just walked us to the same place I started. My apologies, Professor. Are there any lessons from historical propaganda and your domain of expertise that kind of helps inform the modern day and that we haven't already talked about? I know we've covered a lot of ground already, but I'm curious if there are any specific parallels to anything in particular, even maybe more recent stuff. You mentioned Putin in Russia, and other people have mentioned that America is on a similar path as Russia, but I know Russia and Soviet is not your main domain. But I'm curious if there are any parallels that you notice that you want to speak to. I just kind of want to give you an open opportunity to talk about anything you want for a minute.
Well, the parallel that most worries me is that systems like Nazism, Marxism, Leninism, perhaps Trumpism, we'll see, do not fade out with a whimper, usually, because people believe in them wholeheartedly. The propaganda that firmly supports them. People have no encouragement to change. When they change, it's a result of catastrophe. What happened in Germany? Well, they lost the war. The cities got bombed to bits, but guess what? Most Germans, until the end, supported the system. The Soviet bloc fell apart with surprising lack of violence, but it collapsed because it simply wasn't working economically. There was a catastrophe. You had rising sentiment. It fell apart with, as I said, surprising lack of violence, but nonetheless, it collapsed. It didn't gradually fade out. One day it was there, a few weeks later it wasn't. And this is true of all kinds of these systems. And so my fear is that for our current mess to resolve, it may result in disaster economically, politically, militarily, or whatever. I hope I'm wrong on that, but the lesson of history is not encouraging.
Are there any periods that this resembles the most? You mentioned the breaking apart of the USSR. You mentioned the fall of the Third Reich. I'm curious which one you think is more likely for it to trend to. A war that we either win or lose, but is catastrophic regardless, versus the relatively bloodless. Do you think, the West Coast breaks off into the united West Coast of America and Trump doesn't want to start a war in America kind of situation? Does that make sense? Is it the falling of the Soviets, or is it the Holocaust?
You know, that's hard. You can imagine both kinds of prospects. And I simply don't know enough to be a prophet in this regard. I mean, if I were to say the likeliest solution, end is that over the course of time, the whole set of policies results in economic catastrophe for the U.S. When you attack all of your allies, you get mad at the Canadians and the Europeans and the Mexicans and so forth, your major trading partners. I mean, the Great Depression was in part caused by bad tariff policy. So I can imagine.
Really? That was the reason for the Great Depression? Bad tariff
It was a reason. Look up the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. That wasn't the only reason. There were other reasons, but that was a reason the international trade system kind of fell apart. There were other reasons as well. But the point is that resulted in a kind of, and guess what happened? You got Franklin Roosevelt as a president who made fairly radical changes. In the case of Germany, the Great Depression was worse in Germany than the U.S., and people who hadn't voted for Hitler before wanted a solution. The old system didn't work, so they went to Hitler. So I can imagine the policies over time producing that kind of catastrophe, and that probably would be a better outcome than battling, invading Canada or Greenland or that Putin take it. But I mean, I'm not a very good prophet, and so I'm reluctant to be too confident about what the future will bring. I just don't expect the Trump to go some kind of a bang rather than a whimper.